Let me introduce our first speaker. So the topic for today's discussion is how to attempt histopathology and cytology, DNB, ENT or ski stations. So our first speaker is Dr. Saranya Singrawal ma'am. She did her MBBS from MUHS in 2007 and she did her DNB in pathology in 2015. She is a fellow of cardiovascular pathology from GS Medical College and KEM Hospital. She also holds a fellowship in pulmonary pathology from Mayo Clinic in Arizona. She has more than 13 publications. She had more numerous case presentation, poster presentations. She had done observership from AIMS New Delhi and Mayo Clinic in Arizona. Ma'am is author of 3 chapters in WHO classification of tumors, the thoracic tumors 5th edition, which is published from IARC France. So without further ado, let me ask ma'am to kindly start the presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming on DNB Mentors and Sri Harsha ENT Foundation, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak to a group of ENT surgeons, which is a new experience for me. I hope that I can simplify things for you and break down what seems like a big and challenging task, and break it down into sizable chunks, which would help you not only for your exam in attempting the OSCE stations, but also help you ahead in life, because at some point you would have to interact with a histopathologist as a surgeon. So let's get started right away. The outline for this talk is that I will give you a brief introduction of what exactly histopathology is, and then I have broken down the possible slides that you would get in your examination into infections, neoplastic conditions, and non-neoplastic diseases. So to get started, what is histopathology? It comes from 2 words, histo, which means tissue, and pathology, which is the study of disease. So histopathology basically deals with surgical pathology. So whatever you would operate in your operating theater and you would send the tissue down to the lab for study, that would go to the histopathology section. So a very common question that young surgeons or young doctors ask me is, why does it take so much time, 3 to 4 days, to get a histopathology report? And the simple answer behind that is that the tissue needs to undergo processing. In order to get it ready, and before the tissue reaches the pathologist, it goes through multiple different steps, which I'm going to tell you about briefly. And finally, the end result of that tissue processing is the preparation of a glass slide on which there is a thin slice of tissue which measures only about 3 microns. And that tissue piece is stained by hematoxylin and eosin or H&E stain. And the tissue is thin enough that it allows the passage of light through the tissue, and so it can be viewed through light microscopy. So to get the tissue ready for viewing by the pathologist may take up to 1 day. And then it takes time for the pathologist to see the slide, to formulate a report, and then to dispatch it to you. And that is the reason why a histopathology report is never available in 2 hours, unlike biochemistry or hematology. And the steps of tissue processing are accessioning of the specimen which you send from the OT in the lab, the fixation of that tissue for a minimum period of 6 hours in formalin, the grossing of the tissue, which is basically selection of appropriate areas for study, because naturally if it's a large tumor which measures 5 centimeters or 10 centimeters, we cannot study the entire tumor under the microscope. We have to select representative areas, and that is done during the process of grossing. And then the tissue undergoes processing, which is basically the removal of water from the tissue and replacement by paraffin wax. This makes the tissue hard enough so that we can cut thin sections. Then the next step after that is embedding, where the tissue has to be correctly oriented, because if you have incorrectly oriented tissue, you may not be able to see all the layers of the tissue which you need to study. So embedding is a really important step. Microtomy or cutting is actually the preparation of thin sections which measure 3 or 4 microns. These sections are then placed in a water bath to remove the folds, and then they are lifted up on a glass slide. The tissue is then stained. The most commonly used stain is H&E stain, which is also called the routine stain. We then have to place a cover slip on top of that tissue, and then the tissue then becomes ready for microscopic examination. After the tissue is examined by the pathologist under the microscope, a report is formulated and then it is ready for dispatch. So as I mentioned before, the talk is divided into infectious diseases. It is divided into neoplastic diseases and then a few non-neoplastic diseases. So under the infectious diseases, we are going to cover several topics, and the very first one of those is diphtheria. Now, this is not a very common disease for a histopathologist to see, particularly in the post-vaccination era. I myself have never seen one of these. But from literature, we can understand that there are three important, the most important term that you need to remember for this lesion is the formation of pseudomembrane. So basically, this is squamous mucosa that you can see here, and I hope that everyone can see the arrow. This is squamous mucosa, and this squamous mucosa is ulcerated, and there is deposition of this material over here, and this material is fibrin. And you can also see an inflammatory infiltrate. So basically, the pseudomembrane is composed of fibrin, neutrophils, and other inflammatory cells, along with the mucosal ulceration. This disease is caused by the gram-positive rod Bacillus Corynebacterium diphtheriae, which produces an exotoxin. These are non-motile slender rods with clubbed ends, and they form Chinese letter or cuneiform patterns. A common stain that is used for this organism is the Albert stain, and it can be cultured on Loeffler's serum or potassium tellurite agar. We then move on to our next entity, which is probably the most common one that we would see in India, tuberculosis. On a normal routine day, I would report like maybe 5 or 6 cases of tuberculosis before lunch. So tuberculosis is characterized by the presence of epithelioid granulomas. So an epithelioid granuloma, the suffix oid means epithelial-like granuloma. It is important to remember that there are no epithelial cells in an epithelioid granuloma. It is basically composed of histiocytes, which are macrophages. And these macrophages are arranged in a palisaded arrangement. So this is a localized lesion, which is composed of macrophages or histiocytes. And it has caseating necrosis in the middle. If you remember your undergraduate pathology, caseation is a type of necrosis where there is no tissue structure preserved. So this is granular eosinophilic material. You can also see even at this very low power that there are certain circular structures that you can see here. These are basically giant cells, which I'll be showing you on higher magnification. You can also see that this area appears a little darker, and the reason for that is that there are a lot of inflammatory cells here, and the inflammatory cells are basically lymphocytes. So this is another higher part image, and here you can again see this formless caseating necrosis, which is very eosinophilic or pinkish in color. Around it, you can see the lightly staining histiocytes. And the arrangement of the histiocytes is said to be palisaded, and I will explain this terminology further down. And you can also see that there are Langerhans type of giant cells. Now, Langerhans giant cells have nuclei which are arranged towards one pole, and the nuclei are often in a horseshoe-shaped arrangement. This is yet another image where you can now start to see the histiocytes clearly, and you can see that they have slipper-shaped nuclei. And you can also see the lymphocytes which are located towards the periphery. So what are all the things that we looked at? We looked at epithelioid granuloma, which is composed of histiocytes, caseating necrosis in the middle, Langerhans giant cells, and lymphocytes. So this is a disease which is caused by the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Cell-mediated immunity is important for the formation of these granulomas. It is an acid-fast bacilli, as you know. The most commonly done stain to demonstrate these bacilli is the ZN stain. So the ZN stain on tissue would produce a blue background with red bacilli. You can also do fluorescence staining using auramine and rhodamine. And TB-PCR or gene expert is now a very common way of demonstrating these organisms, because you may or may not be able to demonstrate them on light microscopy even by using a special stain. So you're going to think by the end of the lecture that palisade is one of my favorite words. So a palisade is basically a fence-like arrangement. So what that means is that the long axis of the cell is parallel to the long axis of the adjacent cells around it. So you're going to see this term palisade appear at least 3 or 4 times during the course of the talk, and you should understand that it is a fence-like arrangement. We move on to the next entity, which is syphilis. And the word that you need to remember here is a special type of granuloma, which is called a gumma. Now, the gumma of syphilis has coagulative necrosis in the center. In tuberculosis, we saw caseation necrosis. Here in syphilis, it is coagulative necrosis. Around it, you again have histiocytes and you have inflammatory cells. These inflammatory cells are different from the cells which are seen in tuberculosis. There you saw lymphocytes. Here in syphilis, you see plasma cells. So a gumma is a special type of granuloma which has coagulative necrosis and plasma cells. You can use a special stain, which is basically a silver impregnation technique called Warden-Starry stain, to demonstrate the spirochetes which produce syphilis. So syphilis is caused by Treponema pallidum, and it produces gummas or non-caseating granulomas which can have coagulative necrosis, and the inflammatory cell that you see here are plasma cells. Another feature that you see is end arthritis. And end arthritis is basically a small vessel which shows vasculitis or inflammation of the vessel. And again, here the inflammatory cell that you would see is plasma cell. Moving on to the next entity, rhinosclerosis. So rhinosclerosis is produced by a bacteria, which we are going to talk about later. Here, the characteristic feature is that you don't see well-formed granulomas, but rather you see sheets of histiocytes, sheets of foamy histiocytes. You can see that the cytoplasm appears foamy, like soap bubbles. So you can see that it's a very foamy, bubbly kind of appearance. And again, you can see plasma cells. These foamy histiocytes are called Miculous cells. So the bacteria causing this particular entity is the Klebsiella rhinoscleromatis. You can see foamy histiocytes, which are called Miculous cells. You can demonstrate these cells by using the PAS stain. And the common differential diagnosis when you see this particular appearance is Rosai-Dorfman disease, which I will be discussing later on during the lecture. We move on to the next entity, which is Candida. Candida is basically an yeast. So in order, this is a very florid picture where you can see a lot of yeasts, like all the pinkish dots that you can see here, all of these are yeasts. But sometimes they may not be so numerous. So how you would identify that there may be Candida in the slide is that you would see a lot of necrotic tissue. So when you see the necrosis, you focus on those areas and then you would be able to see the Candida. So Candida is basically budding yeast. So this is an yeast here, and you can see that this yeast is showing budding, and the budding can progress to form pseudohyphae. Now, it is important to use the word pseudohyphae. I'm spelling mistake which I've spotted here. Pseudohyphae because they are not true hyphae. So the next two organisms which I'm going to show you have true hyphae. Candida actually has pseudohyphae. And you can identify a pseudohyphae because they're actually yeasts which are undergoing budding. So you would be able to see some constrictions, like you can see here or you can see here. So there are some constrictions in the hyphae which helps you identify it as a pseudohyphae. You can use sparse stain in order to highlight these budding yeasts and pseudohyphae. And Candida albicans can be demonstrated by using a KOH mount, or it can be cultured on Savarard's dextrose agar. The next organism that we are going to look at is Aspergillus, and gross morphology of a target lesion. So you can actually see that you have a kind of targetoid appearance to the gross morphology. And microscopically, you now have true hyphae. These are true hyphae. There are certain specific adjectives that help you identify this as possible Aspergillus. First, the hyphae are narrow. They are septate. This is a septa here. There are a few more septae which you can see here. So the hyphae are narrow, they are septate, and they show acute angled branching. So you can see that the branching is acute angled. So these three keywords, narrowness, the septae, and the acute angle branching, help us to identify this as Aspergillus. You can demonstrate, again, you may not see the bacteria at the fungi at the first go. You would just see necrotic areas, and then you would focus on the necrotic areas and you may see the hyphae. And you can use certain special stains like PAS or Gomery methenamine silver stain in order to highlight these organisms. And another important feature is angioinvasion, because these fungi are ended for the growth. So they actually invade the blood vessels in order to obtain a source of iron. So angioinvasion is another important feature. Very often you can find the fungi by looking at the blood vessels. So if you focus your attention on the necrotic areas and the blood vessels, you're more likely to find the hyphae. Mucormycosis is also a fungal infection, and it produces hyphae, but the hyphae are different from Aspergillus. Here the hyphae are broad, they are pauciseptate, and they show right angled branching. So you can see that this is almost a right angle here. So right angle branching. Again, here you can use the same stains, that is PAS and GMS stains, in order to demonstrate these fungi. And they again show angioinvasion because they need iron for their survival. We move on to the next entity, which is rhinosporidiosis. So this is basically a nasal mass, which you would see clinically. You would see a nasal mass if you excised it, and then we studied it under the microscope. The characteristic thing that you see here are these circular structures, which are basically the sporangia. And these sporangia contain small dot-like structures within them, which are the endospores. So you identify rhinosporidiosis by looking at the sporanic endospores. We don't really know the nature of this organism, Rhinosporidium sieberi. It lies somewhere between the fungal kingdom and the animal kingdom. So it's not exactly been classified yet. We don't exactly know what type of organism it is, but you just need to remember the name, and we don't exactly know the classification. We now move on to the neoplastic lesions. And again, here I've tried to subclassify it to try to make sense out of it. And I've tried to classify similar lesions together. So first we have basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, which basically arise from the skin or arise from the mucous membranes in the case of squamous cell carcinoma. Then we have the salivary neoplasms, which are pleomorphic adenoma, Warthin's tumor, which are benign neoplasms, and adenoid cystic carcinoma, which belongs to the subgroup but is a malignant tumor. And then we have a mixed bag of lesions which have different origins. Among them, we are going to look at the schwannoma, ameloblastoma, paraganglioma, fibrous dysplasia, inverted papilloma, angiofibroma, and esthesioneuroblastoma. There are also two thyroid neoplasms that you need to know, but I will not be covering them because they will be discussed by Dr. Pawan. So these are the neoplasms that we are going to focus on. So starting off with the first one, basal cell carcinoma. It's very helpful if you're able to identify the squamous mucosa or the skin, which should be seen towards the surface. And underneath, you will see these nests of basaloid cells. Now, what we mean by the term basaloid is that the cells are smaller in size. They have a high nuclear cytoplasmic ratio. So they actually look very blue. So at low power, this would be a very blue looking neoplasm because of the high nucleocytoplasmic ratio. Now, there are two important features which will help you identify this as a basal cell carcinoma. The first is the palisading in the nests. So again, that term palisading or fence-like arrangement. So you can see that there is some palisading of the nuclei towards the edge of the nest. And then you can see a cleft between the nest of tumor cells and the adjacent stroma. So that artifactual cleft is also very important in identifying this as a basal cell carcinoma. It's a malignant tumor, so you can see some mitotic activity. This is a mitotic figure over here. And remember that these cells are basaloid or very bluish in appearance because of their high nucleocytoplasmic ratio. We move on to a squamous cell carcinoma. And here what you have to remember is that again, you have nests of cells. You can also have like larger and smaller nests and even singly infiltrating cells. Here the appearance is more eosinophilic because the cytoplasm is more. Keep in mind that a squamous cell carcinoma can be well differentiated, moderately differentiated, or poorly differentiated. A well differentiated squamous cell carcinoma produces keratin pearls as seen over here. And then you have these nests of squamoid cells which have more cytoplasm compared to a basal cell carcinoma. So that's why the appearance is more pink over here. And then you have the keratin pearls. The other important thing which you have to remember is that squamous cells show intercellular bridges. So intercellular bridges are basically these thin structures which you can see which connect the cells. They are intercellular junctions. So if you go on high power, you'll be able to see these intercellular junctions or intercellular bridges between the neoplastic cells. And that is a very important feature of a squamous cell carcinoma. So the must remember things over here are nests of squamoid cells, keratin pearls in the well differentiated squamous cell carcinoma, and the presence of intercellular bridges. We move on now to the salivary neoplasms, and the first one that we will be dealing with is the pleomorphic adenoma, or which is also known as the benign mixed tumor. Here you can see the gross appearance, and you can see that it has a kind of gray-white and glistening appearance, and this is because of the presence of the chondromyxoid stroma, which we are going to be talking about later. But the things that you have to remember here is that this is very pleomorphic. So the appearance of this tumor can be very variable. The second thing is to remember is that it's benign. It looks well circumscribed over here. Because it's a benign lesion, you can see that the outline or the circumference is like it's pretty well circumscribed. However, you know as surgeons that this is not a lesion which you can enucleate, right? Because it reoccurs, because microscopically, it does not have a complete capsule, and there can be small tumor projections which extend beyond the capsule. And this is the reason if you try to enucleate this particular tumor, it would recur. And then it pleomorphic because it has a very variable microscopic appearance, which we are going to talk about. It's called mixed. And the reason why we call it mixed is because it has epithelial as well as mesenchymal elements. And we're going to talk more about what we mean by that in the next slide. So when we talk about epithelial elements, the epithelial cells can be either ductal cells forming these ducts or circular structures which you can see here, or the cells can be myoepithelial cells, which are these lighter staining cells seen in the background. Coming to the mesenchymal component, which is equally important in this tumor forms a matrix or a stroma, which can be myxoid, chondroid, or it can even form bone. So this stroma, along with the cells, which are again of two types, constitutes a benign mixed tumor or a pleomorphic adenoma. I know that's a lot to remember, so I put in a slide to help you out. Mixed means that there are epithelial and mesenchymal elements. When we talk about the epithelial elements, there can be ductal cells as well as myoepithelial cells. When we talk about the mesenchymal component, that's basically the stroma or the matrix in which the neoplastic cells are dispersed in. And that stroma can be myxoid, which is basically a kind of bluish background material, or it can be chondroid, forming cartilage, or it can even be osseous, forming bone. Generally, these tumors arise because of mutations in PLAG1. So that's another important thing to remember. We move on to the next salivary tumor, which is again a benign tumor. It is called Warthin tumor. The other name for this tumor is papillary cystadenoma lymphomatosum. I know that that name is a bit of a mouthful, but it's a very descriptive name. So if you're able to remember papillary cystadenoma lymphomatosum, you will be able to remember all the important components of this tumor. Firstly, it forms papillary structures. So papillae are finger-like projections. So you can see that it is forming finger-like projections. It cyst adenoma. Adenoma means it's a benign epithelial tumor, and cyst adenoma means that it forms cystic areas as seen over here. So there are papillary projections, there are cystic areas, and it's a benign epithelial tumor. And lymphomatosum basically refers to the lymphoid stroma of this tumor. It is one of the few histological entities or histopathological entities which has a lymphoid stroma. So that's a very unique feature of this tumor. And the lining epithelium is basically bilayered oncocytes. So bilayered means that there are two layers, and oncocytes are these big eosinophilic cells with a granular cytoplasm. So they are eosinophilic and granular because they contain a lot of mitochondria. So what are all the things that you have to remember about this tumor? Papillary projections, cystic areas, lymphoid stroma, and bilayered oncocytic lining. And oncocytes are large cells with granular eosinophilic cytoplasm, and they contain microscopically, under electron microscopy, these cells are shown to contain a lot of mitochondria. And this affects also the gross appearance of the tumor. The presence of those mitochondria and mitochondrial enzymes gives this tumor a rather brownish appearance on gross examination. So compared to the previous tumor, which was pleomorphic adenoma, which had a glistening and gray white appearance due to the presence of chondromyxoid stroma, a Warthin's tumor, because of the presence of these oncocytic cells, will have a brownish appearance on gross examination. We then come to a malignant tumor of the salivary gland, which is an adenoid cystic carcinoma. So the key word to remember over here is that although it can have variable appearances, you can have, tubular tumors which have a tubular architecture. You can have tumors which have a solid architecture. But the characteristic one which you would be tested on in an examination is the cribriform architecture of a moderately differentiated adenoid cystic carcinoma. So cribriform, the word means sieve-like. So it's actually, you can see that this tumor, it is composed of nests of basaloid cells, and then there are these punched out spaces in between, right? So that those punched out spaces are reminiscent of a sieve. So that is why it is called a sieve-like or cribriform architecture. Another very important feature to remember about this tumor is that it can show perineural invasion. And that is important for two reasons. One, it is painful. And two, because of this perineural invasion, this tumor can recur many, many years after the primary tumor has been excised. So this would be a patient who comes back after 10 years or after 15 years, because this patient may have had perineural invasion. So that's what you can see in this image. This is a nerve, and you can identify it as a nerve because of its wavy buccal nuclei. And around it, you can see the basaloid tumor cells. So now we have used the word basaloid 2 times. We use the word basaloid in basal cell carcinoma, and we also use the term basaloid in adenoid cystic carcinoma. And basaloid just means smaller cells with high nucleocytoplasmic ratio and a kind of bluish appearance under the microscope. So basaloid cells. So that's something to remember. We move on to the next benign tumor. It is a neurogenic tumor and it is called a schwannoma or neurilemoma. Now, schwannoma is composed of spindle-shaped cells. So the spindle-shaped cells show characteristic arrangement. So you have cellular areas, which are called Antony A areas, and you have the loosely arranged spindle cells in the Antony B areas. The Antony B areas, because of the presence of myxoid material in the background, can also show microcyst formation. Another feature is that this tumor shows thick-walled and hyalinized vessels as seen here. Another very important thing to remember about this tumor is it again forms nuclear palisades. So that's yet another time where we are coming across the word palisades. By now you know that this is a fence-like arrangement of nuclei. So you can see that the nuclei are arranged parallel to each other. So this is a nuclear palisade. This is another nuclear palisade. And the cell-free areas or the nuclei-free areas which lie between the nuclear palisades are called Verroque bodies. So these are important terms which you need to remember about a schwannoma. It's a spindle cell tumor. It shows dense Antony A and loose Antony B areas. It shows nuclear palisades and it shows Verroque bodies. We move on to the next tumor which arises from the odontogenic epithelium or tooth forming epithelium, and this tumor is called an ameloblastoma. It has a very characteristic appearance. It has stellate reticulum, which is basically small stellate cells. Stellate means star-shaped cells. So they don't exactly look like stars, but they look kind of triangular in shape. So these are the stellate cells which are present in the center. And around it, you have columnar cells, which are again palisaded. So here, this is like the third or I think the fourth time that we are coming across the term palisaded. So these are columnar cells which are palisaded and which have yet another very important feature, which is reverse polarization, which I'm going to tell you. Now, again, keep in mind that there are many subtypes of ameloblastoma, but the one that you would be tested on in the examination is the follicular variant. So it shows a follicular architecture. So follicular architecture, stellate reticulum, surrounded by columnar cells which are palisaded, and reverse polarization of the nuclei. So what do we mean by reverse polarization? These are 4 columnar cells which I have shown you here. Now, and the columnar cells are resting on a basement membrane, which I've shown you. Now, generally, the nuclei in other tumors or in other lesions or even in normal epithelium, whenever you see columnar cells, the nuclei are always located towards the basement membrane. This is not seen in the case of an ameloblastoma, which shows reverse polarization. That means nuclei oriented away from the basement membrane. So that's an important feature to remember in the case of an ameloblastoma. We move on to our next entity, which is basically a paraganglioma. Now, there are again different types of paraganglioma. So the paragangliomas which arise in the head and neck region are different from those which arise in the abdominal cavity. And these are again different from, the paragangliomas which arise from the adrenal medulla. In the adrenal medulla, the same tumor is called a pheochromocytoma. So there are certain differences of the paragangliomas based on where they arise from or which part of the body they arise from. So we will focus our attention as ENT specialists on paragangliomas of the head and neck region. So a very common site would be like the carotid body and the carotid body tumor. So a paraganglioma under the microscope is composed of nests of polygonal cells, which are called chief cells. And these are surrounded by spindle-shaped cells, which are called sustentacular cells. This arrangement of polygonal cells surrounded by spindle cells forming a ball-like structure is called Zellballen, which is a German word, basically means balls of cells. Again, this is a tumor which has rich vasculature. The polygonal cells stain positive with chromogranate. The sustentacular cells, as you can see in the next slide, the sustentacular cells can be demonstrated by an immunostain, that is S100. And specifically about the paragangliomas of the head and neck region, they arise from the parasympathetic paraganglia. So they may not secrete catecholamines in contrast to those which arise in the abdominal cavity. And some of these tumors may actually be chromogranin negative. And these are very important features to help us distinguish between a paraganglioma which arises in the head and neck region and a paraganglioma which arises elsewhere and metastasizes to the head and neck region. So we'll be able to distinguish between those two entities by using some of these features. So moving on to the next entity, this is a benign neoplasm of the bone which occurs in the medullary region of the bone. And this is called the fibrous dysplasia. So this is actually characterized by the curvilinear trabeculae of woven bone. And in the background, you have fibroblastic proliferation. An important feature generally all this while we have been describing what we can see. But in this particular neoplasm, you need to remember something which is not there. So normally when you see woven bone, you would be able to see osteoblasts around it. So in a normal reparative bone, like if you have a fracture and then, it's undergoing healing and then you have woven bone, you would always be able to see osteoblasts around it. But in the case of a fibrous dysplasia, which is a neoplasm, there is no osteoblastic rimming. And that is important to remember. We spoke about the Chinese letter arrangement of Corynebacterium when we spoke about diphtheria. So this is yet another place where we see a Chinese letter pattern. The curvilinear trabeculae of woven bone look like Chinese letters. So just to keep in mind, Chinese letter pattern, we have seen it in two different places today during this talk. We move on to our next entity, which is the inverted papilloma, also called Schneiderian papilloma. So these are papillomas which you can see in the nasal region. And this, I would say, is the most difficult slide among all the slides to identify. So, if you see, this is the lining epithelium, and under it you can see these large nests of cells, which again have a squamoid appearance. And it's called an inverted papilloma because generally you expect a neoplastic growth to be exophytic or growing outwards. This is actually not growing outwards, this is growing inwards. So it is inverted. And this may look very similar to a squamous cell carcinoma to the untrained eye, or this could look very similar to a basal cell carcinoma. But the things that you have to remember here, one, the cells are not basaloid. They look pink and not blue. The second feature is that this is a benign neoplasm. So this is not going to show mitotic activity. It is not going to show single cell invasion. It is not going to show you keratin pearls. So it's not going to show you any of these features. So firstly, the site can help you in reaching this diagnosis. And the second is that this is a diagnosis of exclusion. So I suggest that you exclude everything else. So it's not basaloid. It doesn't have clefting. It doesn't have any of the features. It doesn't have palisading. It doesn't have any of those features of a basal cell carcinoma. It doesn't have your intercellular bridges. It doesn't have keratin pearls. And it looks something like similar to a squamous cell carcinoma. So then you call it an inverted papilloma. Now, mind you, this is not how the pathologist makes the diagnosis. These are just some little tips and tricks to help you through your examination. Keep in mind that this tumor, whenever you see this tumor, it's very important for the pathologist to comment on whether or not this tumor has been excised completely. Complete excision is important because otherwise it can recur. So that's something to remember. We move on to our next entity, which is an angiofibroma, which is again, going to be a nasopharyngeal lesion in a young adolescent male. Adolescent male because it's dependent on androgens for its development. So that's something. It has a spongy and kind of fleshy appearance on gross. And microscopically, again, the name tells you everything which you need to know. Angio, blood vessels, and fibroma. So the stroma has fibrosis. So that's what you're going to see on microscopic examination. you have these thin-walled and ectatic or dilated blood vessels. And then you have the fibrous stroma and a few strands. This pinkish eosinophilic material is actually collagen. So you have a fibrous stroma. So that's what you have to remember about this entity. And again, the site, the age, and the presentation, like torrential bleeding in a young adolescent male. So that would point you towards this diagnosis. We move on to our next entity, which is going to be the olfactory neuroblastoma or the esthesio-neuroblastoma. So here, first of all, again, the site would help you because this is occurring somewhere in the nasal region. The epithelium over here. So this is the pseudostratified and ciliated respiratory epithelium. So you can actually see the cilia over here. You can see the pseudostratification of the nuclei. And then underneath, you can see the lesional tissue, which is the tumor. And the tumor is composed of nests and lobules or small, round, blue cells. Now, all those adjectives are like really important. So they are small, they are round, and they are blue. So there's when we say small, small is like, a kind of misleading term. Small means it measures about 2 to 3 times the size of a lymphocyte. The cells are round in shape. Remember specifically that in a schwannoma, we said that the cells are spindled. In the case of a paraganglioma, we said that the cells within the nest are polygonal and the sustentacular cells are spindled. Here, the cells are round. In an esthesio-neuroblastoma, olfactory neuroblastoma, the cells are round. They are small and they are blue. Blue because of the high nucleocytoplasmic ratio. Another very important feature of this tumor is that you can have a neurofibrillary background. Again, the biological behavior of this tumor can be very variable. So you can have like the well-behaved ones and the badly behaved ones. So then it's important to perform Hyams grading for this tumor. We now move on to our non-neoplastic diseases, and we're going to cover 3 diseases: Rosai-Dorfman, cherubism, and otosclerosis. So the very first one is Rosai-Dorfman disease. So this is actually sinus histiocytosis with massive lymphadenopathy. So this can come as either a lymph node or this can come as a lesion in soft tissue. So if you think that this image looks very, very similar to what I showed you for rhinosclerosis, rhinoscleroma, you are not wrong. Because again, you have histiocytes in both of these lesions and they are just sheets of histiocytes. But there is one special feature of a Rosai-Dorfman disease which will help you identify it as such. And that is the presence of emperipolesis. So you will see a large histiocyte which has engulfed live and intact lymphocytes within its cytoplasm. Live and intact being keywords. So emperipolesis is a condition where you can see engulfment of lymphocytes and plasma cells within macrophages or histiocytes. And that is a characteristic feature which will help you to identify this as Rosai-Dorfman disease. If you want to confirm that it is in fact this entity, you can perform S100 immunostain. Keep in mind that we have already spoken about S100 when we spoke about schwannomas, because schwannomas are also S100 positive. And we also said that the sustentacular cells of a paraganglioma are S100 positive. So it's like, you're always told that an immunostain is not specific. There is no specific immunostain which will immediately help you reach the diagnosis. So immunostains are always interpreted in the context of histology, and they are interpreted differently at different sites. So that's something to keep in mind. We move on to the next entity, which is basically cherubism. This is an autosomal dominant condition and it shows bilateral involvement of the mandible and the maxilla. So what you would see here is, because it's involving the mandible and the maxilla, you're basically seeing bone here towards the periphery. And these cells, these plump cells which are lining the bony bone, are actually the osteoblasts. Remember, we said that in fibrous dysplasia, there are no osteoblasts. And here you are clearly able to see the osteoblasts in a case of cherubism. Then you come to the actual lesion itself. The lesion is composed of these large osteoclast type giant cells. Remember that in tuberculosis, we saw Langerhans giant cells. Here we are seeing giant cells again, but they are osteoclast giant cells. And you can also see the fibroblastic matrix. So the surrounding cells are fibroblasts. We move on to our last entity, which is otosclerosis. Now, otosclerosis is actually not a lesion which is seen by a surgical pathologist. It may be seen from time to time by somebody who's doing autopsy related work. And even then, because these dissections are not commonly carried out during autopsies, it would not be seen by everybody doing autopsy pathology. So this is a lesion which I myself have never seen, but I will try to summarize it to the best of my ability. So this is actually a disorder of bone remodeling, and the exact etiology is not known. It may be of viral etiology. So the disease goes through various phases. Initially, there is a phase of autospongiosis, which is basically bone resorption by osteoclasts. So the bone will actually get resorbed. And then there is a phase of otosclerosis, where there is actually deposition of new bone. And whenever new bone is deposited, you will have cement lines. So those are like important features. Generally, a pathologist would never see it in the phase of autospongiosis, because there would be no deafness in these patients until the stage of otosclerosis is reached. And once otosclerosis occurs and there is fixation of the stapes foot plate to the oval window, then the patient would have deafness, and then the patient may undergo surgery. And then if the stapedial head and crura are excised and sent for histopathology, they would again be normal, because these are not the regions which are involved. So you actually have to perform an autopsy to see otosclerosis. So this, you can actually see the bone over here, and you can see that this lesion, this area, it actually looks highly eosinophilic. So if we go for a higher power from a region like that, it would show you irregular cement lines, and it would show you a kind of Swiss cheese appearance with dilated pseudovascular spaces. And that is what, and that was, those are the features which would help you identify this as otosclerosis. So those were my last few slides. All the images which I've used in this talk are from Robbins and from Ackerman, which are our standard textbooks. And these are the best images of these entities that you can see. I've also used the internet resources for a few of these entities, and wherever I've used them, I have cited them. I would be happy to answer any questions which you may have, and I hope that this talk has made some sense to you and helped you I make more sense out of the pink and blue that you see in histopathology.
Yes, ma'am, exactly. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think I personally feel that if I could have seen your video like 2 years before, then I could have scored more marks. So this was very crisp, very to the point, and it was awesome, ma'am. Very good, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am,
are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am. There is one question: how to differentiate between rhinoscleroma and paraganglioma?
Oh, they look quite different actually. So that's an easy one. Let's go back to the slides. So rhinoscleroma is just a sheet of foamy histiocytes. So these individual cells are histiocytes. Histiocytes are the same as macrophages. Okay, they are the same name for the same cell. So you can also call them foamy macrophages. Macro, large, phage means a cell which eats. So eating. So foamy histiocyte or foamy macrophage means the same thing. So it's just basically a sheet of cells. It has no particular architecture. So they're just large cells. If you look at their nuclei, they will be slipper shaped because they are histiocytes, and all histiocytes have slipper shaped or kidney shaped nuclei. So it's just a big sheet of cells, and the cells have a very foamy appearance. So you can see that it looks very bubbly or very foamy, and within the cytoplasm, you can kind of see these whitish areas, right? So good question. The closest differential to this particular slide would actually be Rosai-Dorfman. And in Rosai-Dorfman, what the examiner wants you to identify is basically the emperipolesis. They want you to come out and say the word emperipolesis, and they want you to be able to define emperipolesis, and they want you to say that the lymphocytes and the plasma cells that are engulfed by the histiocytes are alive and intact. So that's really important, because generally macrophages eat dead or dying tissue. They do not eat cells which are alive and whole, right? So that's the most important differential here. Let's go back to a paraganglioma and let's look at that as well. The architecture there is quite different. So paraganglioma has more of a nested appearance. So you can actually see that this is not a sheet of cells without any architecture. This is actually balls of cells, Zellballen. So this is like a ball of cells, and there are polygonals to the middle, and then there are spindle sustentacular cells towards the periphery. I hope that you are able to see the cursor as it moves. So there are spindle cells towards the periphery of each of the nests. So there is a group of polygonal cells, and it has an outline or a rim of sustentacular cells which are spindle shaped. And then remember that it's a very vascular tumor, so you would be able to see a few blood vessels or something. See, there's an RBC here, there's an RBC here. So there are numerous small blood vessels here. So if you did an immunostain for blood vessels, you would be able to see them so much better. But even here, you can see that there are several RBCs and everything. So architecturally, they are quite different. Here, you have to be able to identify that these are nests or Zellballen, and they have polygonal cells which are chief cells, and then they are surrounded by spindle shaped sustentacular cells. You can use IHC to demonstrate these cells. The chromogranin will demonstrate the polygonal cells, and S100 will demonstrate the sustentacular cells. So again, here you can clearly see in the S100 that these are actually nests of cells. They are not a sheet, right? A sheet is just something which is just spread out like a sheet of paper, right? It's just a sheet. It does not have any other architecture. Here, there is a definite architecture to these cells. Are there any more questions?
Ma'am, there are only praises, praises, and praises for you, ma'am.
Oh, praises, praises, and praises. Thank you so much. But, it's like on my very first slide, I have my email and I have my hashtags and I have my Twitter handle. So if anyone needs to get in touch with me or ask me any further questions, they're always welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
One ma'am. These days, some centers do something called microwave processing for
Microwave processing, yeah, conventional tissue processing takes a full day, because the processing cycle itself is it takes like 12 hours just for that cycle, and then you have the embedding, and then you have the cutting, then you have staining, and taking all that into account, it's almost a full day before the slide reaches the desk of the pathologist. And that is provided that the tissue is well fixed and we don't have to fix it for an additional day. So it may be anywhere from 1 or 2 days for the slides to actually reach the desk of the pathologist. And then the reporting starts after that. So microwave processing and vacuum processing, these are newer technologies by which you can fix the tissue faster and you can impregnate it faster with wax. So that entire processing cycle, which takes 24 hours in centers that can afford it, the time can be cut down to 4 hours or 6 hours. And these are ways of rapidly processing the tissue. So if you're lucky enough to be in a good center where you have that, then you would get your reports much faster.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I have a doubt, simple doubt. Like, is there anything for corona patients or any histological findings for
actually, if you had told me, I would have added a slide, but then it's actually acute lung injury. That's the most common pattern.
Okay.
And acute lung injury, it basically affects the lung diffusely. So you don't have localized injury in coronavirus. It's going to affect the entire lung.
So it is not for ENT basically.
Yeah, it's not going to affect the upper respiratory tract. I don't think there would be anything specific.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming on our platform, ma'am. So,
thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, ma'am. I think we will start the second session, ma'am.
All right.
So kindly be with us. If we have any question, then you can answer them.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Yes, and Dr. Pavan is not live with us, but he is on phone. So I will be playing the recorded video. Give me 1 minute. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
This is Dr. Pawan Trivedi. So,
Let me introduce Dr. Pawan Trivedi. He did his MBBS from GSPA Medical College, Kanpur, and he has done his MD Pathology from Motilal Nehru Medical College in Allahabad. He is Assistant Professor, Department of Pathology in Mayo Institute of Medical Sciences, Lucknow. And he's a consultant cytopathologist and histopathologist, Ultra Diagnostic Center, Lucknow. So apart from academics, he's more into acting and doing funny things. And he's very close friend of mine. So let us hear about thyroid and how to do FNAC from Dr. Pawan Trivedi.
Today we will discuss the basic steps of FNAC. Means how do we perform FNAC on a patient. So as we will discuss thyroid lesions later, so we will basically focus on the FNAC procedure of the thyroid lesions. So any patient comes to you with the swelling of thyroid. So first of all, we have to position the patient. To position the patient in a way to prominent the swelling. So we make the patient lie down on the couch and put some pillow or some object just under the shoulders to make the neck extended and to make the thyroid prominent. We just palpate the thyroid or swelling of the thyroid. We make the we feel the margins of the thyroid and we notice or we just try to find out the type of swelling, like it's nodular swelling or it's a diffuse thyroid enlargement or like that. So then we will try to clean the area where we perform the FNAC and we take 24 to 26 gauge needle to perform. We put the needle in the swelling and do needling, to and fro needling process. Usually in thyroid, we do not try to aspirate, as the thyroid is a vascular lesion, and whenever we try to aspirate the swelling, we will get bloody tap. So we usually avoid aspiration in case of thyroid swelling. We simply put the needle and do to and fro movement to get the material. After getting the material, we spread it on this glass slide and try to make a proper thin and even smear. After making a smear, we fix the slide in alcohol. The most commonly used alcohol to fix FNA slide is ethyl alcohol. After fixing the slide for 15 to 20 minutes, we will put the stain on the slide, and the stain we routinely use in cytopathology are MGG and PAP stain. MGG and PAP stain, which stain is to be used is the decision of the cytopathologist or the pathologist who is performing or who is going to do microscopy. After staining, we dry the smear and put a cover slip and see under the microscope. So these were the basic steps of fine needle aspiration. So this is the photograph showing the procedure of FNAC on a patient who is having a thyroid swelling. So I am repeating this picture here again because here this picture is showing the proper procedure of thyroid FNAC. Here we can see syringe piston which is attached to a syringe with a needle. The needle is placed in such a position that it lies approximately 90 degrees to the plane of the swelling. So after putting the needle, and here one thing is important to understand, that we always put the needle in the most prominent part of the swelling. usually in the most prominent part of the swelling. But if the swelling is cystic along with some solid areas, so we try to put the needle in solid area to get most significant aspirate. Okay, so now moving to the thyroid lesions. We cannot discuss thyroid lesions in toto in a very small time. So we will discuss only a few important lesions for your point of view. Most common lesions of thyroid. The most common lesion of thyroid is colloid goiter. Goiter is a general term used for the any swelling of the thyroid. And what is colloid goiter? Colloid goiter is simply the collection of colloid within the thyroid. Collection of colloid within the thyroid. So after performing the FNAC, when we put some stain like MGG or PAP stain, we will get these kind of pictures. These kind of pictures. These three pictures, 1, 2, and 3. These three pictures are showing in a background thin colloid. Here we can see thick colloid along with the follicular epithelial cells. These follicular epithelial cells are parenchymal cells of the thyroid. We can very well see follicular epithelial cells along with the abundant colloid. Colloid in MGG stain. In exams, usually we get cytology smears, either MGG stained or PAP stained. So we have to identify how colloid looks like in MGG stain. In MGG stain, these three slides are MGG stain. In MGG, the thyroid looks magenta color, either thin or thick. Both types of colloid looks magenta in color. And the follicular epithelial cells looks bluish. The nuclei of follicular epithelial cells look bluish. So in colloid goiter, you will see abundant bluish or pinkish material in the background along with few scattered follicular epithelial cells. This is PAP stain, Papa-Nicolau stain. In PAP stain, we see the color of the colloid usually pinkish to orangish. Pinkish to orangish along with scattered follicular epithelial cells. If such kind of micro photograph comes in your exam slide, so you can very easily identify the abundant thin colloid in the background along with few scattered follicular epithelial cells. So abundant thin and thick colloid along with variable number of follicular epithelial cells, and these follicular epithelial cells are usually present in these cohesive groups or monolayered sheets. We can sometimes we can also find some macrophages which are laden by the some tissue, some cellular debris as well as the necrotic material. We call that tingible body macrophages. Here in these four micro photographs, we are not able to see the tingible body macrophages, but we can very well appreciate the thin colloid, thick colloid, and follicular epithelial cells. These tiny cells are follicular epithelial cells. The second most common lesion of the thyroid is autoimmune thyroiditis. Autoimmune thyroiditis is basically or commonly a disease of young female. A young female patient, you will get a history like a young female patient of 25, 30 or 35 years age group comes with a thyroid enlargement. And here one thing to notice, the enlargement of thyroid in autoimmune thyroiditis or autoimmune thyroid disease is most of the time diffuse. Means the whole thyroid glands tends to enlarge in autoimmune thyroiditis because the autoimmune process goes on in whole thyroid parenchyma, not at a single point. So you usually get completely enlarged thyroid gland. So autoimmune thyroiditis basically contains the two extremes of disease. At one extreme, you can get hypothyroid clinical features, and at other extreme, you will get hyperthyroid clinical features of hyperthyroidism. So in Graves' disease, you will get clinical features of hyperthyroidism. And in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you will get clinical features of hypothyroidism. So Graves' disease and Hashimoto's thyroiditis both are the autoimmune type of thyroid lesions, and these two diseases are the extremes of the autoimmune thyroid lesions. So we will discuss the one by one. First is Graves' disease. Graves' disease, you will get a history of young female coming to you with for coming to you with total duration of illness of around 4, 5, 6 months with diffuse enlargement of thyroid and all the clinical features of hyperthyroidism. If we perform the FNAC in a patient of Graves' disease, we will get a cellular smear. Cellular smear means if we see the slide under the microscope, we see plenty of follicular epithelial cells. खूब ढेर सारे follicular epithelial cells, along with some typical features like absent of colloid, absent or very scant. In the background, these two photomicrographs are NGG stains, and in the background you can very clearly see the absence of colloid, means the pinkishness. The pinkishness or magenta color colloid was seen in those previous slides is absent here. Here what you are seeing, you are just seeing RBCs in the background. These RBCs, these are the RBCs in the background. Means you will get hemorrhage in the background. And follicular epithelial cells in monolayered sheets or forming small follicles. You can very well see the formation of small follicle here. So follicular epithelial cells are present in monolayered sheets or very small follicles. Along with that, you will get a very peculiar or very characteristic microscopic finding, fire flares. In Graves' disease, you will get fire flares. These pinkish vacuolar structures are fire flares, known as fire flares. And fire flares just indicate the hyperactivity of the follicular epithelial cells. These fire flares indicate the hyperactivity of the follicular epithelial cells. So in Graves' disease, if you get a picture of Graves' disease, definitely you will get fire flare, because the fire flares are the characteristic feature. So if someone going to ask a slide of Graves' disease, so he will definitely put a slide which has these fire flares. After seeing fire flare, you can very well say that this is the case of autoimmune thyroiditis and is Graves' disease. Another type of autoimmune thyroiditis is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. In Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you typically get a long history of thyroid swelling, a young female coming to you with a long duration of thyroid swelling, usually 1 year, 1.5 years, or 2 years. And the enlargement of thyroid is diffuse. You will not get a nodule or nodular enlargement. You will simply get a diffusely enlarged thyroid gland. And on performing FNAC and putting stain, you will get polymorphous population of lymphoid cells. These cells are the follicular epithelial cells. Here you can see follicular epithelial cells, and these dark colored cells are lymphoid cells. And these larger ones are also lymphoid cells. That's why we are not saying lymphocytes. We are saying lymphoid population, polymorphous lymphoid population, and plasma cells in background. And in foreground, we can see very well see follicular epithelial cells. Here you can also try to identify the presence of RBCs in the background, means hemorrhage and absence of colloid. Likewise, in Graves' disease, there was absence of colloid and presence of hemorrhage. Here in Hashimoto's also, you can see presence of hemorrhage and absence of colloid. Follicular epithelial cells, what happens in autoimmune diseases? If we talk in general, autoimmune diseases, any tissue or any organ gets infiltrated by the cells which are involved in the immunity, like lymphocytes. So here you can also see infiltration of lymphocytes and destruction of follicular epithelial cells by these lymphocytes. So lymphocytes try to impinge or try to infiltrate these follicular epithelial cell clusters. So in between the follicular epithelial cells, you can get lymphocytes. These darker one are the lymphocytes, which are trying to go or trying to impinge the follicular epithelial cell cluster. At some times, you can also get some Hurthal cell changes, but Hurthal cell changes and giant cells are variably present. Means it is not necessary to be present in every and each slide of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Means you can get, but not always. What you will get always is the presence of lymphoplasmacytic infiltrate in the background. Okay, So if you get a FNAC slide of a thyroid lesion in a young female, showing the presence of abundant lymphocytes, like in this one, along with follicular epithelial cells, you can very well say or very easily say, yes, this is a slide of autoimmune thyroiditis, most likely Hashimoto's. Okay. Hashimoto's usually clinically present as hypothyroidism. Features of hypothyroidism. Why hypothyroidism? Because of the destruction of the follicles of thyroid due to these infiltrating lymphocytes. So now we will move to some important malignant lesions of thyroid. There are big list of malignant lesions of thyroid, but I will discuss only a few important ones. And most important one among these is papillary carcinoma thyroid. Papillary carcinoma thyroid is very important. If I have the chance to ask some malignant lesions of thyroid, I will always, at least 99% of times, I will ask the papillary carcinoma thyroid, because it is very, very, very important malignancy of thyroid and has some very characteristic features on cytopathology or cytology slide. So in papillary carcinoma, the question will be framed like a young female comes to you with a thyroid nodule. You will get in papillary carcinoma thyroid, you will get a single solitary thyroid nodule in a young female coming to you with total duration of illness of approximately 3 months, 4 months or 5 months. तो इस तरीके से पेशेंट आपके पास आएगा and he will tell कि I have developed some tiny swelling over my midline of the neck, and it is there for around 4 or 5 months. So a typical presentation of papillary carcinoma thyroid is young female presented with single solitary thyroid nodule. If we perform the FNAC, what we will get? We will get cellular smears. Almost all the malignant lesions, if we perform FNAC in any malignant lesion, we will get a cellular smear. Because of the high cellularity, we will get cellular smears. Along with that, these cells are arranged in papillary tissue fragments or papilla-like structures or sheets with distinct anatomical borders. What is anatomical border or distinct anatomical border? I will tell you later when I will show you the cytopathology slide. Along with that, you will get nuclear overlapping and crowding. अभी तक हमने जितनी बात करी, चाहे वो कोलॉइड गोइटर रहा हो, चाहे वो autoimmune thyroiditis रहा हो, in all those lesions we got monolayered sheets of follicular epithelial cells. But here in malignancy, in papillary carcinoma, we are getting nuclear overlapping with nuclear crowding, and some peculiar or specific characters of papillary carcinoma, and those are intranuclear inclusions and nuclear grooves with powdery chromatin material. Look here. In this photomicrograph, we can very easily identify the finger-like projections, and these finger-like projections you can very well identify the anatomical border. Means beyond this border, you are not able to see any cell going out. So we call this distinct anatomical border, finger-like projections, arrangement of cells in overlapping fashion with overcrowding of nuclei. Here you can very easily see the papilla or finger-like projection of the cell. Both these, this is MGG stain, May-Grunwald-Giemsa, MGG stain, and this one is PAP stain. How the papillary carcinoma thyroid looks in MGG stain, this is how papillary carcinoma thyroid looks in PAP stain. If we talk about some nuclear features, which is very characteristic of papillary carcinoma thyroid, first one was intranuclear inclusion. You can see inside the nucleus there is some inclusion-like structure seen. This is intranuclear inclusion. This is MGG stain. This is PAP stain. In PAP stain, you can very well see intranuclear inclusions. And here in this photomicrograph, you can see intranuclear grooves. There is some dark lines seen in the nucleus. This is called intranuclear grooves. and the chromatin of the nuclei is powdery, fine powdery chromatin. So these three features, intranuclear inclusion, nuclear grooves, and powdery chromatin, these three features define papillary carcinoma. If in any thyroid lesion you will get intranuclear inclusion, nuclear grooves along with powdery chromatin, so you can easily suspect, or you can very easily diagnose papillary carcinoma. So the next malignancy. Now we will move on to follicular carcinoma thyroid. So follicular carcinoma or follicular adenoma, these are the lesions which cannot be differentiated on FNAC or cytopathology. Cytopathology पे हम follicular adenoma और carcinoma को differentiate नहीं कर सकते हैं. But there are some suggestive features, or there are some features which can suggest that this lesion is follicular carcinoma. For example, the smears are highly cellular. The cell yield is very high. Prominent microfollicular pattern. Colloid-free hemorrhagic background means the colloid is totally absent in these slides. And nuclear crowding and overlapping. Nuclear crowding and overlapping, you can say this feature is a very prominent feature of malignant lesion. किसी भी organ का हो, nuclear crowding and overlapping is a very prominent feature of malignancy. So you will get nuclear crowding and overlapping in almost all the malignant lesions. Okay. In these two photomicrographs, what we are seeing repeated follicular pattern. Means these follicular epithelial cells are forming round acini-like structures. If you try to look closely, you will see round follicular structures are being formed by these follicular epithelial cells. In this photomicrograph also, you can very well see these round follicular structures. So the repeated microfollicular pattern is very characteristic of follicular neoplasm, either follicular adenoma or carcinoma. Okay. So to differentiate between follicular adenoma and carcinoma, we have to perform histopathology. We cannot differentiate carcinoma or adenoma on a FNAC slide. Okay, so what are those features which you will get on histopathology to designate that lesion as carcinoma? There are two certain features which indicate the lesion is carcinoma. First thing is capsular invasion. We all know almost all the benign lesions of human body are well circumscribed, and most of the time they are also capsulated. So follicular adenoma, as the name suggests, is a benign lesion. Adenomas are benign lesions and carcinomas are malignant lesions. So to differentiate between a benign and malignant lesion, in case of thyroid, here in follicular lesion, we have to identify the capsular breach by the neoplastic cells, as well as we have to identify the vascular invasion. Means two features, capsular breach and vascular invasion are must. Either of two, दोनों में से कोई एक होना चाहिए. Either of two must be there to designate that lesion as malignant. So what are the criteria? हम कैसे पता लगाएंगे कि ये capsular breach हुआ है या vascular invasion हुआ है कि नहीं हुआ है? So there are certain criteria. For example, if we look here for capsular breach, here in A, B, F and G and I, there is no capsular breach. Means capsule has been invaded, but the outer boundary of the capsule has not been penetrated by the lesion. So A, B, F, G and I, these are follicular adenomas. If these kind of breaches are there, so we will very well say this is adenoma, not carcinoma. To designate it as carcinoma, there should be either capsular breach or capsular protrusion by these neoplastic cells beyond the outer boundary. Here in C, this is follicular neoplasm going beyond the outer boundary of the fibrous capsule. Here we can say, yes, this is follicular carcinoma. Here you can see there is protrusion of the follicular neoplasm beyond the outer boundary. Yes, here we can say this is follicular carcinoma. Here the follicular lesion or neoplasm is present outside the focus of the neoplasm is present outside the capsular boundary. Here we can say this is carcinoma. Here you can say this is carcinoma. But at I, J, A, B, F and G, we cannot say it is carcinoma. We will say it's adenoma because there is no capsular breach or capsular protrusion by the neoplastic cells beyond the outer boundary. Okay, this is the capsular criteria. And for vascular criteria, the tumor emboli must be completely circumscribed by the endothelium or attached to the endothelial lining, or the capsular invasion must be present beyond the capsule, vascular invasion must be present beyond the capsule of the lesion. So to designate it follicular carcinoma, the vascular invasion should be like either this or this or this. अगर ट्यूमर का impingement है blood vessels पे, blood vessel is impinged by the tumor or follicular neoplasm, but the tumor emboli is not present within the lumen of the blood vessel, so we cannot say it is vascular invasion. Okay, here the tumor emboli is not circumscribed by the endothelial lining, so this is also not vascular invasion. And here you can very well see the tumor emboli is surrounded by the red colored line. That red colored line is endothelium. Here you can see the red color line surrounding the emboli means endothelium circumscription. Here you can see the tumor emboli attached to the blood emboli. Here you can also say, yes, it is vascular invasion. But here there is absence of blood emboli as well as absence of endothelial lining. So here you can reject this to call it follicular carcinoma. Okay, so these two are the criteria which designate the lesion as carcinoma or adenoma. So follicular neoplasm of thyroid, either adenoma or carcinoma, you cannot definitely say it on the basis of only cytology. Okay, you have to perform histopathology. The last important lesion.
Just 5 minutes more. Two, one.
So the next malignant lesion of thyroid is medullary carcinoma. Medullary carcinoma, a slide of the medullary carcinoma is usually very cellular with dispersed population of cells. The cell morphology can vary. It either will look spindle shape or small cell or plasmacytoid morphology. Iron isonucleosis means the variation in the size of the nuclei. Binucleated and multinucleated forms are common. The chromatin of the malignant cells is stippled and amyloid is variably present. Variably present means the amyloid may or may not be present in each and every slide. Okay, so this is these all are the photomicrographs of various morphological types of medullary carcinoma. Here we can see the cells with plasmacytoid morphology. Plasmacytoid means the cell which looks like plasma cell. Plasmacytoid means plasma cell like. So the morphology of the plasma cell, if we remember, the plasma cell looks, it has eccentric nuclei with cytoplasm at one side and nucleus at other side, with the clock-like face chromatin and bluish or cyanophilic cytoplasm. So here in medullary carcinoma with plasmacytoid morphology, you will get the cells with a nucleus placed at one pole of the cell and the cytoplasm at the other pole with cyanophilic. Cyanophilic means bluish cytoplasmic color. And you can see here a pinkish or magenta colored acellular material amyloid. Okay, so this is MGG stain, and in the background we can see RBCs. These are the RBCs. These are the medullary carcinoma cells showing plasmacytoid morphology, and this pinkish or eosinophilic color material is most likely amyloid. Here we can see a medullary carcinoma thyroid with small cell morphology. Small cell, usually we use the term small cell if the cell size is approximately the size of small lymphocyte. So here we cannot differentiate a small lymphocyte and medullary carcinoma cell just by seeing the cells. So we say, or we will classify this type of medullary carcinoma in a small cell type medullary carcinoma. Here the malignant cells are seen in somewhat longitudinal or spindle shaped nuclei. So here we can say the medullary carcinoma spindle cell morphology. So medullary carcinoma plasmacytoid morphology, medullary carcinoma small cell morphology, and medullary carcinoma spindle cell morphology. You can get all these types of morphological features in medullary carcinoma, but you will get usually most of the time one type of cell morphology in one patient. Okay, so these all were the important lesions of the thyroid. So before ending this session, I would just like to summarize the photomicrographs of the various important thyroid lesions. First of all, that was the colloid goiter. In colloid goiter, you will get these small, tiny, bluish colored structures. These all are the follicular epithelial cells. These are the follicular epithelial cells. In the background, you can see bluish or magenta color thin colloid along with thick colloid on MGG stain. But in PAP stain, you will get pinkish or orangish color colloid with scattered population of follicular. These are the follicular epithelial cells. Okay. So in exam, you will get a slide with abundant background colloid and scattered follicular epithelial cells. You can very well say this is a slide of colloid goiter. Okay. So in autoimmune thyroiditis, Graves' disease, you will very easily identify the fire flares. If you are getting fire flares, these are the follicular epithelial cells. If you closely look at the background, the bluish or pinkish colloid is absent. In spite of the colloid, you are getting the RBCs. These are the RBCs, round structures. These round structures are RBCs. These bluish or purplish color structures are follicular nucleus of the follicular epithelial cells. And these pinkish vesicular structures are fire flares. So if you are getting fire flares with absence of colloid and presence of RBCs and presence of follicular epithelial cells, you can easily identify Graves' disease. In Hashimoto's, in this photomicrograph, here you can very well see follicular epithelial cells. These are the follicular epithelial cells with abundant cytoplasm, abundant bluish or cyanophilic cytoplasm with impingement by the mature lymphocyte. These dark ones are the mature lymphocytes. These dark structures are the mature lymphocytes, and these light colored larger cells are also lymphoid cells. And in background, you can very easily identify the RBCs. These are the RBCs and absence of colloid. Colloid nahi dikha hai. This is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but the stain is different. This is MGG stain. This is PAP stain. Here you are seeing these larger cells with this greenish bluish abundant material is cytoplasm of the follicular epithelium. These are the follicular epithelial cells, and this is the abundant cytoplasm of follicular epithelial cells. Along with that, these tiny darker structures are, these ones are mature lymphocytes which are destroying the follicular epithelial cell cluster. In papillary carcinoma, as the name suggests, the cells are arranged in finger-like projections, means papilla, with overlapping nuclei and overcrowding, anatomical borders. Along with that, you can get a fibrovascular core within the papilla. Fibrovascular core is not very well visible here. So, papillary carcinoma mein aapko, you have to remember three features. One is intranuclear inclusion. These are the malignant cells with intranuclear inclusion. Here you can see these are the nuclei. Okay, but in this nuclei, you can see a ring-like structure within the nucleus. This is intranuclear inclusion. MGG stain. And in PAP stain, here you can also see this is the nucleus, and within the nucleus there is a light colored ringed structure called as intranuclear. Here you can also see intranuclear inclusion. These are the RBCs in the background. These pinkish colored structures are the RBCs in the background. Here in this photomicrograph, these are the malignant cells with intranuclear grooves. This is nucleus, which has a central dark colored line. This is intranuclear groove. This is also intranuclear groove. So these are the features of papillary carcinoma. One more important microscopic feature of papillary carcinoma is presence of psammoma body. Psammoma body usually is not seen on FNAC. It's a feature, or mainly a feature of histopathology. So psammoma body, you will get psammoma body on histopathological slide, but you can get on FNAC, but it's very rare. And what is psammoma body? Psammoma body is nothing but just the degenerated papilla, degenerated calcified papilla, which is called as psammoma body. It has concentric rings and is dark bluish in color, seen on histopathology slides. Okay, so in follicular carcinoma, we will get a repeated microfollicular pattern formed by the follicular epithelial cells in a background of hemorrhage, means colloid is absent. Cellular smear, follicular epithelial cells forming repeated microfollicular pattern, absence of colloid. Okay, so you cannot differentiate follicular carcinoma and adenoma on FNAC. To differentiate carcinoma and adenoma, you have to perform histopathology, and on histopathology, to differentiate carcinoma from adenoma, you have to follow these two criteria of capsular invasion and vascular invasion. Medullary carcinoma, in medullary carcinoma, you will get malignant cells in either of these three morphology, either plasmacytoid morphology, small cell morphology, or spindle cell. Spindle cell means the cell nucleus will look stressed and form a spindled structure. In plasmacytoid morphology, you will get malignant cells with a nucleus placed at one end and cytoplasm at other end, means eccentrically placed nucleus. And in medullary carcinoma, as we all know, we can get amyloid. Amyloid on MGG stain. This is MGG stain, this is MGG stain, this is PAP stain. On MGG stain, the amyloid looks like amorphous, acellular, pinkish or magenta colored material. So these were all the important lesions of thyroid we have discussed. And thanks to Dr. Prateek for inviting me to share my opinion, and good luck for your exams. Thank you so much.
So that was the end of Dr. Pawan Trivedi's lecture. So I think we can conclude this session. And thank you so much, Dr. Saranya ma'am, Dr. Pawan Trivedi, Dr. Sriharsha, Dr. Bhargav Bose, Sriharsha ENT Foundation, and to all the members, all the best. Be safe and read more. Ma'am, you would like to add anything, ma'am?
Yeah, thank you everyone. All the best for your exams. Be safe.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for coming, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.